Well, I am very happy to be here today. It was a short drive, and so arriving here was kind of like just driving in the backyard, and here we are. So very glad you've come to be a part of this learning experience. So when we look at the screen, it says, "Stop the bleed, how healthy grief practices stops the hemorrhage of pain." So I want to start out with a couple of stories. David sat across the table from me after a weekend of workshop and seminar where we were talking about healthy grief and how to support people through their grief and through their loss. And as he was there, sitting across the table from me, he shared with me that the reason why he attended this workshop was because of the recent death of his mother-in-law, a beloved matriarch in the family. When her death occurred, everybody's hearts were just crushed. And so it had now been about 3.5 months since that death had happened, and that's why he came to the workshop. But as we were conversing over dinner, he went on to tell me other stories about his life and, what he did for an occupation and about his kids and how long they'd lived in that community. And he said that he'd been a respiratory therapist for probably about 15 years. And then it almost seemed as if it was difficult for him to continue the conversation. It was obvious that what he did at work was troublesome to him. And he said, Karen, I don't know if I can continue to do this work any longer. I'm trained to come in and to help, little ones and medium ones and big ones and old ones catch their breath and continue their life as in this respiratory therapy. But they die. And he didn't have any support system to help him when they die. So I asked a few questions about, is there nothing? Do they provide you any training? Do they give you any day off? Do you have any processes to go through to process what's occurred for you and why it's affecting you? And he said, no, there isn't anything for me, and I don't know that I can do this work anymore. In December, I was in Florida talking to a group of hospital chaplains when one of them raised their hand and told me the story of a floor nurse following the death of a patient, scurried quickly back into the nurse's station area, found a place where there's a closed door and just huddled in there, weeping and crying. Another nurse stepped in and said, "Can I help you? What's going on?" And she says, "I can't take it any longer. I'm done. I am done." So when I came across this quote the other day as I was getting prepared for our time together, I thought, this is really pretty appropriate. Stop the Bleed is a national awareness campaign and call to action. Stop the Bleed is intended to cultivate grassroots efforts that encourage bystanders to become trained, equipped, and empowered to help a bleeding emergency before professional help arrives. And you're saying, so what does that have to do with grief education? Well, for me, it seemed to have everything to do with grief education, because I have a heart to stop the bleed of what is happening among so many healthcare professional environments, where employees like the ones of the 2 stories I just mentioned to you are suffering, are considering leaving their profession, are thinking they can't do this anymore because in their work environment there is no support, no one there as bystanders to come in and help the excruciating pain that they're feeling and that they don't know how to process in a healthy, promotional way so they can continue their work. And so I'm baffled. Why? Why are healthcare professionals as unprepared as they are to process loss in a healthy way? Why? And then maybe it's not just healthcare professionals. Maybe it's in any profession. Maybe it's in any home. Maybe it's in any office, any place of work, any school, any place that we're unprepared to to know how to come in, step in, and comfort the pain, soothe the pain. So, let me ask you this question, and we'll discuss it later. But who has been your role model for healthy grief? I'll ask that to a stranger in the airplane sitting next to me, and I can watch the Rolodex, their eyes going back, and they're going, oh, no. And then they eventually say, I don't have anyone. No one has been my role model for healthy grief. So maybe it's not just in the healthcare profession that this happens. Maybe it happens all across the board in many places, and it needs our attention now. Do we want to be one of these bleed stoppers? Do we want to become trained and equipped to know how to step into someone's pain, into their grief, support them, guide them, and help them through? I hope so. So today we're going to learn how to take care of ourselves, our own grief, and then we're going to learn how to take care of someone else's. Are you ready? Let's go. So, where does grief enter the professional world? Well before there may even be an incident in the hospital, in the emergency room, in the doctor's office, well before grief has already entered through these doors when you and I have walked in. It doesn't take but a colleague who's going through loss, or our own grief and loss experiences, both past and present, and then the unexpected waves or triggers that may happen throughout the workday that suddenly catch us off guard, and those moments of anger, or sadness, or denial, or being overwhelmed with that pain can come sweeping over us. But what does it really look like? This image seems to help me understand. I call it the grief and loss umbrella. And here we have, underneath this umbrella, we have a variety of things that would be listed under death, grief, and loss, aren't they? So how many of us have lost some money and felt really disappointed about that loss? I had a major downturn in my portfolio not long ago, and I went, oh, wow. I know people who've lost their homes in the Paradise Fire. Not only did they lose their home, but they lost their community, they lost their churches, they lost their schools, and now they're losing friends as they move away. The losses are enormous. The loss of a pet, the death of a loved one. We can have the loss of dreams. And all these losses and this grief walks right through the door to our workplace, doesn't it? We bring it with us. And so, when an event then occurs, such as when a patient comes in with his or her loss story, are we sensitive? Are we paying attention? Are we willing to listen to them? What about the delivery person who comes to deliver a package? And we've developed a relationship over the years, and we notice there's a sadness about his or her countenance. Do we have the space and time to step into that place with them and just check in with them, what's happened for them? Or a janitor, or food service worker, the colleague, the nurse that we've been working alongside, the physician that we've been working with, the PT, all of these people walk through the door, and we bring in our own grief and our own loss. And then the inevitable happens. Death occurs on our own watch. And I have another story. David went into the hospital for just a simple routine gastrointestinal surgery. It wasn't supposed to be complicated. It wasn't supposed to have any issues. It was supposed to be just a kind of in and out in 2 or 3 days, and it would be just fine. But following surgery, he went into complications. And he was in an ICU for quite a few weeks, which is pretty unheard of. They don't like to keep you in ICU very long, do they? But the longer he stayed there, what do you think the staff began to feel about this patient? connected, right? Absolutely. He moved off to another section of the hospital, and yet his condition continued to worsen. And the staff there now continued to build a relationship with him. The nursing staff, the respiratory therapist staff, the PT, the dietitian who would come visit him, the janitor who cleaned his room, anybody that associated with him in his room. Daily, every day, without missing one, his wife would come, not just for a short visit, but to spend 8 to 10 hours with him. So think about the relationships that are happening now. David's health continued to decline. And on the 100th day, he died. 100 days of being in relationship with this man and his wife. On their watch, he died. I don't tell the story just because it's a sad story. I tell the story to ask this question. Who needs grief support on day 101? Everyone. That is exactly right. Who needs grief support? It would be everyone that had been involved with this patient, right? And who gets grief support? That's the question. That is the question. Everyone needs it, and who receives it? And so, we find that, just like this picture on the clock, that it takes time. Time is valuable in business and in, and in healthcare. You just can't not take care of all the other patients while you step out to take the time it needs to get the grief support that you need. So this is one of the, as it were, conundrums on how to be able to support healthcare professionals while they're still continuing to give the healthcare needs to ongoing patients. But time is still required. It takes time to adjust the whole physiology of one's body, our minds, in order to keep moving forward. But is it just time? Have you ever heard the saying, time heals all wounds? It just takes time? Well, I'm going to say it takes time because time is not the healer. It will never be the healer. But it takes time because it requires time for action or release to restore the heart, mind, and body. Are we getting this? This is not just, in enough time, I won't feel these feelings anymore. I won't have this sense of loss anymore. There's no amount of time that will take that away. Distance, it will produce distance between an event and right now, but it doesn't bring the healing or the restoration of the heart, body, and mind. So what does? Well, we need to take action, release, and restore. How about saying those words out loud with me? Action, release, and restore. Let's do it one more time. Action, release, and restore. We have such a short time together, and I want to make sure you go home with one or two really great ideas. Because you see, as soon as grief happens, we have options. In fact, anything in life we have options. But some of us feel that when a death or a loss has occurred in our life, we are now the victim of this occurrence. And I don't have any options. But here's some options. We can mask the grief, or we can reveal it. We can stuff the grief, or we can release it. We can pretend, or we can be honest. So which ones do you think weigh in on a healthier side for healthy grieving? Masking, stuffing, pretending, revealing, releasing, or honesty?
Release and honest.
Okay. So this side obviously is the heavier side for what healthy grief is. So you've met me today, Karen Nicola, and now you can say, I have met a person who has maybe not role modeled to me, but has helped me learn a little piece of what healthy grief looks like. Okay? This is what the culture asks us to do. This is what our culture informs us to do, doesn't it? How well is that working? How does Dr. Phil say? And how's that working for you? Dr. Phil will say. Yeah. Well, commonly endorsed by our culture, but which options are more effective? Well, let's continue, because we want to be able to give us enough time to really find out what are the ways that we can assist ourselves if we're in an environment that is not supportive and assisting us. What can we do to assist ourselves as health care professionals? So 4 of many, okay? So this is not an exhaustive list, but 4 of many steps to support healthcare employee retention. Because the 2 stories we started out with were 2 people in healthcare that said, I'm out. I don't want to do this anymore. This is more than I can handle. I don't know what to do with my grief when I have to interact with death on my watch. Plus, carry the own grief I have in my own personal life. So here are just 4. Let's start with the first one. Let the tears flow, empty the toxins of stress. What does our culture tell us about crying and tears? Come on, we know it. What have they told you?
It's okay for women and it's not okay.
Okay, yeah. You men, you can't cry. Women, it's okay. But even as a little girl, stop your crying right now, or I'll send you to your room till you have something to cry about. What are the other things we hear that our culture tells us?
You're weak.
Oh, you're weak. Mm-hmm. And there's this sense of feeling ashamed or embarrassed when we cry, right? And so what do we normally do with the tears that are trying to find their exit?
Hide them.
Hide them. We kind of snuffle them back down. We take them back into our body. Well, here's the thing. There is this amazing, beautiful, magnificent stress release that comes through grieving tears. Underneath the microscope, they've taken a look at the tears when we cry for an onion, the tears when we cry for joy over birth or happiness, the tears we cry out of anger and frustration, and the tears we cry for grief. Only one of those 4 types of tears has in the microscope slide body toxins. And it's the tears for grief. The grief tears have actual physiological toxins that come out through our crying. So now here's the deal. It's healthier to cry your tears of grief than it is to suck them down. Way healthier. In fact, Henry Maudsley once said, he was an early pioneer in the field of psychology in Britain in the mid-1800s. He says, tears that do not find their vent. Grief that does not find its vent through tears can make other organs weep. And I would say today that today's science is validating that the stress we keep within our body negatively affects our health. So, when we are tempted to swallow back down those tears, for whatever reasons that we have been misinformed about, I hope that from this day forward, number 1, you will say, wait, these tears are healthy for me. This is a benefit to me to cry. Number 2, real men do cry. And number 3, if I cry, there will be a release of these toxins that would otherwise stay inside my body. So, let the tears flow. Number 1, reveal the story. Unmask your pain on paper. A lot of us might feel really uncomfortable to tell the depth of our heart cry, our pain, our anguish, our anger, our rage, whatever is our experience, our despondency, our despair, our depression, that is a part of normal grieving. And we don't want to burden a stranger. We don't want to talk to someone else about it. But there is a need to release it nonetheless. And there's a huge need to release it through our words. Now, if I don't have a hearing ear, how else can I release it? Well, one way we can release it is through writing, putting it on paper, getting it out. And in fact, it's our belief and it's our experience that this process of taking this grief and letting it flow physically out of our hands with a pen or pencil at the end of our fingers allows for healing space to take place. We can only give it a try, right? What harm would there be? It's not going to hurt anybody. But by revealing the story, by no longer keeping it a secret, by putting it out on paper, we have unmasked the pain. And instead of now the pain being in charge of us, we can have some control over it. Number 3, we want to release the energy, letting go through exercise. Now, there is a lot of negative energy that is built up while we grieve. And it's called tension or stress in another way. So we found that this tension and stress can be relieved through crying, through our own tears, but it also needs to be released physically. So under those moments where our grief is holding on to us so strong, getting outdoors and taking a walk or a jog or releasing through stretching exercises or even breathing exercises that releases the tension, those are physical ways to let go, to release that grief energy, that grief tension. So what can we do? We can walk, we can run, we can pound the floors or the dirt or the ground just to be able to get that out of our body. And I think of our friend David that we told this story out from the very beginning, the respiratory therapist, David, that one. If he knew that he had a release for the tension and the anxiety of patients dying, how helpful that would be for him to do that self-care. Very helpful for him. And then last is 4, intentionally seek spiritual support and healing for your heart. There is no question that there is a beautiful place, a need that we have inside of us that says, I need hope, and I need faith, and I need love, and oftentimes we need forgiveness, and I need peace. I need to have a trusting relationship. And so being able to seek these spiritual needs, seek fulfillment for these spiritual needs, be aware of them, acknowledge them, and say, yes, this too is a part of my healing process. This too is a part of what will stop the bleed for me so that I won't have to run from this pain, but I can overcome it. There's another area that is enormous in the healthcare industry. That's an enormous bleed, and it has to do with finances. There's an estimated $100 billion loss annually in our nation, in the workplace, due to unattended grief. Now, that workplace is any workplace environment, but where everybody gets in their cars or takes their rapid transit or gets to work some way, walks through that door with their own grief, it results in an estimation of $100 billion lost annually. Now, that's a lot of money. And it's no less in the healthcare industry. Because this is what happens. There is this financial bleed when there is unresolved grief. What do we get? More sick days. What do we get? Mistakes and accidents that occur. What do we get? We get employees and staff that are burned out. High turnover. Have to pay to have somebody retrained to do the job that my respiratory therapist is going to quit on. The nurse is going to quit on. So it just seems to make sense to me that in this workplace environment, that we should be excellent, have excellent standards for our employees in the healthcare profession. For who? For whose sake? The sake of the employee? The sake of the patient? Yes. And for the sake of the cost factors that are involved, could we not begin to have this conversation and make the adjusted changes so that we can stop the bleed? One of the things that, how could we do this, might come in the line of grief and trauma education, support planning. We can stop the bleed that way. Let's take a look. What would happen if there were system-wide grief, trauma, care for all employees? For the management, clinicians, janitorial support staff, spiritual leadership? I'll tell you what could happen. Remember the story that I started about with the nurse in Florida? Who went running to the nurse's station, locked herself back in the room and said, I'm done, I can't do this anymore. That hospital had this plan in action already. And with that plan, a team immediately arrived to support this nurse. They listened to her, they heard her out completely so that what her needs were able to be expressed. That release, remember we talked about the need to release? So she was able to release what it was inside of her that was so overwhelming that she wanted out of nursing altogether. By listening to them, by bringing in the right professionals that had been trained to stop the bleed for any employee, that nurse was saved on the job. Do we know how to support colleagues that are going through their own losses? Now, this seminar being particularly directed toward the healthcare profession and the fact that people do die on our watch and how it does affect those in that profession. We've made that our primary example, but you've brought up an excellent point. That's exactly why in every workplace environment, what could happen if we were trained and prepared to help stop the bleed, to help support people in their space of deep grief and anxiety and loss. Which is why I do what I do. And I come to companies and do that exact kind of work to help prepare them, to help prepare the staff and the leadership to be able to understand how imperative it is that we give this right kind of support to one another. So that's what we're going to find out next. How do we help the person next to us? How do we do that? And today we're only going to talk about 4 short little things that we will get to do to help them. So can we learn the skill of authentic comfort? Are we born with it? Not generally. You know, there are those people who are very empathetic, and they're the ones that come and pick me up. Oh, I had a friend who would pick me up every time I fell down on the playground. And she would help take me to the bathroom and get my knee all cleaned up. And you know what she is today? A nurse. So, you know, it was kind of the precursor to what her livelihood came to. But we do sit in offices, we go to work in all kinds of work environments, and the person next to us has just walked into the door, and they brought their grief and their loss with them. So how can I be an authentic comforter? Would you like to be one? Would you like to learn 4 simple things that you could do to authentically comfort somebody else in their loss? Let's take a look. Before we do, this is the mantra. The goal is never to take away their grief. And you might go, well, yeah, but I want them to feel better. I want to take their sadness away from them. I don't want their pain to keep going. So yeah, I want to take their grief away. And I will tell you, please don't do that. And here is why. Because they need to do their grief. You see, this is a very uncommon and unknown and misunderstood thing about grief. The only way to restore ourselves in grief is to grieve. There's no way we get around this, get under it. There's no way but through it. So the only restoration for our broken heart is to grieve. Now, we have options, don't we? We have healthier sides of grieving and we have less healthy sides of grieving. And so we can come along as a friend to support healthier grief and suggest healthier options for their grief. But can I do someone else's grief for them? I can't. And it would be wrong of me to try to take it away. Does that make sense now? So the goal is not to take away their grief. That is not our goal. Our goal is to comfort. That we can do. And these are the skills we can learn in order to comfort. One-on-one grief care. These are the steps that stop the bleed of broken-hearted people. And they seem somewhat counterintuitive. First of all, we just simply want to observe and take your cues from the griever. So if the griever is talking, do we want to jump in and talk? No, it's their turn to talk. If the griever is silent, do we want to jump in and talk? We want to, but should we? Their cue is their silence. If the griever is depressing, do we want to fix that? Yeah, we want to fix it, but they need to go through that. If the griever is angry or crying, can we take it away from them? No. So we are just with them. We go with them, as you've just said. We go with them through this journey. We observe and we take your cues from the griever. The second one is just as a courtesy. Asking permission. Permission to touch. Permission to hug. Even permission to give a tissue. Now, we've just talked about tears a little earlier, and that they really are healthy, and we really do need them. But when someone else is crying, how does that affect us? Are we generally really comfortable with someone else's pain or tears? No. So this is another counterintuitive thing we get to learn as comforters. We get to be comfortable with their tears. Comfortable even if they shrug their shoulders and say, no, don't touch me. Comfortable with whatever it is their experience is at that moment. That's counterintuitive, because what's the first thing we want to do when we encounter pain? We want to run, right? And that's what happens to so many people in their loss. They are left ignored, isolated, because people haven't learned how to comfort. I can't take their grief away from them. I will listen to their cues, and I will ask permission. What works for them? Is it okay if I just hold your hand right now? Would you like a tissue? And the reason why we ask for that is that sometimes when someone is crying, we just hand them the tissue, right? And that often will tell the grieving person, oh, you are not comfortable with my tears. I better suck it up. Okay. And so if you notice that they're just definitely could use a tissue, would you like a tissue? And they can say, no, I don't want a tissue. And they can continue their tears and their crying, or they can say, Yes, thank you, and they can take the tissue. But it honors them and it gives them the freedom of choice as to how we're going to interact with them. And that's always important with our grieving friends. Oh, these moments are all about, what does it say? Them. Has it ever felt like it's all about us? It usually is. So that when those seasons of silence takes place, we jump in with, oh, yeah, my puppy died too. Or, you see what I'm saying? That's a really exaggeration, but the point of it is that my loss cannot make someone else's broken heart be comforted. We think we're trying to identify with them, or we're trying to get close and go, yeah, I know just how you feel. No, we don't know just how anybody feels. And so it's important to remember that these moments are all about them. And so that leaves us with the best action possible. And that is to listen with your heart. So that means this is a different kind of listening. Today you're listening to me, and you're hearing for information, and you're evaluating it, and you're judging whether, oh, yeah, no, I don't think that's so, or, oh, that's a good idea, right? I mean, those are all the things the mind is working busily while you're listening to me. When I'm listening to a grieving person, none of that activity should be going on. Because as soon as that activity goes on, it distracts me from being able to listen with my heart. To listen from my heart says, I am 100% here with you. And that kind of listening is profound healing for a person. Profound healing. Listening with the heart. So, what is some care we can give to ourselves when we grieve? Do you remember what they were? We can release, right? Remember? I'll go back so we just make sure we've got that. We can let our own tears flow. We can put our story on paper. We can exercise and release the energy that way and seek spiritual support. Those are some good things we can do for ourselves. What can we do for others? We can be present with them. We can acknowledge their pain. We can let them know we can, by permission, would be happy to touch or hug or hold them. These moments are all about them, and we can listen with our heart.